Director of Procurement. I am a Director of Procurement Advocacy and International Affairs at ACEC. I'd like to welcome everyone. This is the first of our series on integrity in America. Before I turn things over to our moderator, Rich Stump, just usual housekeeping items. Those of you that have questions, please use the chat box in the bottom of your screen, and we'll be on the lookout moderating those as they come in to get these questions answered. Thanks everyone again for joining us. I'll turn it over to you, Rich.
Richard, you're muted.
And again, Dan, thank you very much for the introduction and for the opportunity to start an important conversation related to integrity and the fight against corruption in the built environment. As Dan mentioned, my name is Rich Stump. I am the current chair of the Integrity Management Committee for FIDIC. So on behalf of FIDIC, FIDIC North America, and ACEC USA, we welcome you to today's discussion. If we can move forward to the next slide, please. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping before we really get to the main event. And just for those of you who are not familiar with the American Council of Engineering Companies, it is the member association that represents the United States engineering community, over 600,000 professionals, and reports up to the FIDIC Secretariat in Geneva, Switzerland. Moving on to the next slide. Again, just a little bit about FIDIC itself. For those of you who are not familiar with the global voice of the consulting engineers, FIDIC represents over 100 member associations around the world and engineers, allied professionals, and construction professionals, and is an important sponsor and backer of the global fight against corruption in the built environment. Next slide, please. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, I am involved with the Integrity Management Committee as its chairperson. We do have a number of communities of practice and communities of interest within FIDIC, and just here are a few of them that I work and collaborate with on behalf of delivering FIDIC's values of quality, integrity, and sustainability in support of engineering worldwide. Next, please. FIDIC North America was founded last year in 2021 through a memorandum of understanding. It incorporates three primary countries and member associations: ACEC United States, ACEC Canada, and CNEC in Mexico. And they are the ones that make up FIDIC North America. Next, please. So today we've got a fantastic conversation on tap for you. This had its genesis in last year's IMC presentation globally related to the fight against corruption. And today joining me are Chris Williams, who is a Senior Director for Anti-Fraud and Corruption at the Millennium Challenge Corporation. He's joined by my former colleague, Shaka Dennis, who is a former Deputy CEO at the Millennium Challenge Account-Liberia, and James Pierre, who was the General Counsel of that same Millennium Challenge account in Liberia. And you can see a little bit about the successful delivery of the $257 million portfolio of road and energy work that MCA-Liberia delivered to the Liberian people in a bilateral agreement with the United States through MCC. Next, please. And just to tell you how we're setting up the conversation today, there is a larger story arc related to conversations in corruption. So you can see that, or conversations against corruption, I'll say. So you can see that we've got a larger focus in April related to part of our FIDIC webinar committee series on the IMC. That'll be more demand side focused. And then our compatriot member associations in Canada and Mexico will be having their own presentations related to the larger theme of integrities in the Americas. Again, continuing this conversation on just integrity in the fight against corruption. So with that, that finishes the opening remarks. And what I'd like to do is to start off, Chris, by asking you to kind of set the table for all of us. Tell us a little bit about MCC and the genesis of the compact. So over to you, Chris.
Sure. Thanks, Rich. Well, MCC is a U.S. government international development agency. A lot of you have probably heard of USAID, the Agency for International Development. We're a similar international development agency established by the US government and by law in 2003, and we were started operating in 2004. We make grants to support programs to reduce poverty through inclusive economic growth. That's a little bit different than some other programs that provide humanitarian assistance. Our focus is on inclusive economic growth. We have two different types of programs. What we're mostly known for are major grants that are called compacts. And these compacts or grant agreements range from $60 million to $700 million. And for a country to get a compact, one of these major grants, they have to qualify based on meeting at least half of 20 indicators that are collected from independent third-party sources like the World Bank, the IMF, or UN agencies. And there is one on control of corruption. The selection process is not too complicated, but it does take a while to describe. So if you're very interested, you can go to our website, mcc.gov, and read all about it. MCC also, besides making countries qualify for our grant assistance, we also emphasize country ownership. The programs that we fund are co-designed by the partner governments, not just by MCC staff and consultants. And more importantly, the partner governments establish their own counterpart agencies. We normally call them, or they're normally called, like Millennium Challenge Account-Liberia or Millennium Challenge Account-Niger. In shorthand, we call them MCAs. And the MCA is responsible for implementing the MCC funded program. That means that they procure and manage works contractors, supervisory engineers, and other consultants. So it's not MCC hiring companies to rehabilitate hydroelectric dams or to build roads. It is the MCA, our counterpart agency that is set up in each country that does all of that, that does the procurement and manages the contracts. And then the final point that I want to make is that MCC programs are strictly time bound. With the specific exception of delays caused by the COVID pandemic, our compact programs cannot last more than 5 years. There are no extensions, except if there's a global pandemic. So that really makes everybody really focus on getting the work done, because there are no time extensions. It's pencils down at 5 years.
Great. Chris, thanks for setting the table and helping us all understand what MCC is about and what this compact was about. So let's hear a little bit about now what MCA-Liberia was about. So Shaka, share a little bit with us in your experience as the Deputy CEO and how MCA-Liberia came to be.
Okay, thanks, Rich. In 2016 January, the US government through MCC granted Liberia a $257 million compact for 5 years. So after the compact was granted, then pursuant to that, the National Legislature of Liberia created the MCA-Liberia, which is an autonomous agency responsible for managing the compact funds. So the MCA was governed by a 9-person board, headed by the Minister of Finance and Development Planning, the ministers, and also the heads of government agencies that are going to have statutory authority in the 2 sectors that the compact of the projects the compact sought to improve, which is energy and roads. In addition, the 9-member board included 1 person from the private sector and civil society. So the compact was divided into 2 projects, energy and roads. The main activities were rehabilitation of the country's only hydropower plant, also the construction of a new 48-inch, 5-kilometer water line from the dam of the power plant to the water treatment plant. It also provided funding and support to the Liberia Electricity Corporation to improve energy delivery for the people of Liberia. And also the funding also provided for the establishment and the standing up of the country's first independent regulator of electricity in the country. So those are some of the major projects. So despite all of these challenges, Rich, we were able to disperse 93% of the $257 million even during, despite of COVID and everything. And the compact ended in January 2021. I'll turn it back over to you.
Yep. Yeah, Shaka, thanks for telling us a little bit about MCA-Liberia and what that compact looked like. And we certainly know that without certain safeguards in place to deliver that compact, it wouldn't have been as successful as it was. So Jimmy, can you share a little bit with us about those safeguards and maybe specifically about what the MCA-Liberia did related to fighting fraud and corruption?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So MCC has an anti-fraud and corruption policy that applies to all MCAs, which obviously included MCA-Liberia. This policy prohibits all forms of fraud and corruption, including bribery, coercion, collusion, etc. So in keeping with MCC's AFC policy, MCA-Liberia developed its own anti-fraud and corruption action plan. The development of this plan was a fully collaborative effort between MCA-Liberia and MCC. The process started with AFC training that was provided by MCC here in Monrovia, Liberia. Chris and a colleague of his came to Liberia for a 3 or 4 day period. They trained MCA-Liberia staff, other stakeholders such as the other government implementing entities, contractors, etc., on MCC's AFC policy. After the training, MCA-Liberia developed its own core team. The AFC core team was an internal team within MCA-Liberia that was principally charged with developing and overseeing the implementation of the Anti-Fraud and Corruption Action Plan. The team was headed by me, the General Counsel, and included Shaka as the DCEO, had our Director of Finance Administration, our Director of Procurement, and as well as our Private Sector Development Director. Once the core team was developed, the core team first task was developing and populating our risk assessment matrix. The risk assessment matrix was a matrix that included every possible instance or idea of potential fraud that could take place during the implementation of Compact, from the energy projects to the roads projects, monitoring and evaluation, even finance administration, and most important, also as importantly, procurement. So the risk assessment matrix had every single risk that we could think about, from the lowest risk to the highest risk. Then it included like the mitigants that we could put in place, and even after the mitigants were implemented, what are the chances of those risks even occurring and the impact it could have on the implementation of the compact. MCA-Liberia developed our risk assessment matrix, and the MCC Liberia team developed its own risk assessment matrix. So after those two risk assessment matrices were developed, the MCC core team flew to Washington, D.C., and we had several day-long meetings to reconcile our two respective matrices. At the end of that, we all had one risk assessment matrix for the Liberia Compact. And that led into the development of the action plan, because the action plan focuses on mitigating the highest risks. So those are the risks that are in the action plan. Once the action plan was developed, it was sent to our board for approval, and then the core team then took place in making sure that it was implemented. And the core team also had a responsibility to report to the board periodically, like on an annual basis, to inform the board of how the action plan was being developed, how the action plan was being implemented. So those were the, that's just the background on MCA-Liberia's action plan, how it came about. And the reason why I wanted to go into that level of detail is for two reasons. One, to show you how it was a lot of thought and energy went into developing the action plan, and two, the collaborative nature between MCA-Liberia and MCC in developing the action plan.
Jimmy, thanks for really teeing up the importance of the action plan and how that worked into the strategy of the AFC. And you bring up a really important point, which I want to turn over to Chris here in a minute, which is the fact that it was collaboratively developed with support from MCC. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about the oversight and the governance that MCC provided to MCA-Liberia throughout the 5-year duration of the compact?
Sure. Well, I mean, one thing that I think that we know and have learned is that well, MCC does provide a significant oversight itself. For instance, from the very beginning, we observed the process of recruiting and hiring MCA-Liberia staff, and including participating in the final interviews for key personnel. This is useful and important because in a lot of countries and in the United States, I'm sure many people are aware of, when there's a big project going on, sometimes people with political power will try to put their own people, so to speak, into positions, regardless of whether they're qualified for the position or not. So having MCC involved in developing the terms of reference for the positions and also participating in, or at least overseeing, the recruitment process helps keep everything on the level and helps prevent unqualified but connected people from getting put into particularly very important positions. MCC, for most of our countries, including Liberia, we normally have a team of about 24 technical experts on all relevant topics that work with our MCA colleagues. This includes, but is not limited to, well, in Liberia, it included but was not limited to road construction, electricity regulation, environmental and social performance, gender and social inclusion, and financial management, procurement, even monitoring evaluation, which MCC considers to be very important, and legal that they work with directly with Jimmy. And they would work with the MCA counterparts regularly. Mostly our technical experts work on 2, 3, 4 different countries, but they still have plenty of time to work with their counterparts. And they often visit, at least when there's not a global pandemic, they're often visiting these sites or visiting our partner countries, normally at least twice a year, often every quarter. We also normally have 2 US citizens that are MCC employees that are based in the capital city. So they work on a daily basis physically with the MCA, with the MCA counterparts. The MCC reviews all the major procurement documents and major deliverables. We have what we call no objection authority. It's slightly different than approval, but I think no objection kind of explains itself. So we make sure that the procurement documents, from the bidding documents through the evaluation reports, and through the final contracts are all acceptable to MCC. Our MCC technical experts, they also have consultants and engineers that work for MCC, not for the MCA, to assist the MCC staff in oversight. As I said, they're normally working on 2, 3, 4 different countries, so they'll often have reach back teams that they can look to for assistance, and those people often will do visits every 3 to 6 months to actually, especially once construction starts, to see what's actually happening on the ground. And as I have to say, as part of our oversight, we do require that all MCA staff undergo anti-fraud and corruption training, which I delivered with one of my colleagues. That's 13 hours of training. So we talk about what our anti-fraud and corruption policy is, pretty clear, you don't do it. But also we talk about what the standard risks of fraud and corruption are and how to develop the anti-fraud and corruption risk assessment matrix or risk register that Jimmy provided in great detail. Another thing I want to mention is that besides all of these MCC oversight efforts that we do, we also have our MCA counterparts, and particularly MCA Liberia, to use. We provide them, let's say, I call them external requirements to help them insulate them from pressures. All procurements have to be completed in accordance with MCC's program procurement guidelines, which are based on the World Bank's procurement regulations. They're different from the US government's federal acquisition regulations, which many people on this webinar will be aware of, but the underlying principles are the same. You want open, transparent, fair competition for contracts. And all MCC funding has to be used in accordance with what we call our cost principles. And each MCA, including MCA-Liberia, creates a very detailed, what we call fiscal accountability plan or financial management manual, if you will. They're normally over 80 pages long on exactly how everything needs to be done in order to spend MCC funding. We also require in most countries, and it happened in Liberia as well, that the MCA is supported by internationally procured companies that are embedded with the MCA to do their procurement work and to do the financial management. So it's not just MCA staff who are running the procurement process and running all of the review of the invoices and making payments. There are international companies that are working in accordance with MCC's rules that help the MCAs do all this work. I think that that can be very helpful for an MCA because if somebody, let's say somebody from the government or anybody comes to the MCA and asks them to make a improper award or make an improper payment, the MCAs can say, I can't do that because even if I wanted to, the MCA doesn't control the bank account. It's controlled by the financial management consulting firm that works for the MCA, but also has to follow MCC's rules. And often they're working in other countries, so they don't want to risk their reputation. Just like a supervisory engineering firm won't want to risk its reputation by letting something slide in a particular project. These companies, they're not going to let something slide in for a particular MCA to protect their other work. The construction work, it uses contracts based on the FIDIC approach of works contractors and supervisory engineers, both Red Book and Yellow Book. All of this stuff that I'm talking about, it's very important for it's very important for the protection of MCC funds, which is US taxpayer funding. It also helps protect the MCA because they can say, when pressure is put on them, they can point to a whole range of requirements that are around them and say, we just can't do it because if we try to do it, we'll get caught. It's not up to me. It's up to, there are all these other people watching. And so as I like to say, our rules and regulations are very detailed, can be very annoying, but they also have a very strong anti-fraud and corruption impact. Even if we don't say that following the procurement guidelines is done to reduce the risk of fraud and corruption, that is one of the corollary benefits, is that it does shut a lot of windows, or at least and shut a lot of doors for fraud and corruption.
Chris, that was a really fantastic overview of all of the different layers of support, the different fences that you've put into place through MCC working in collaboration with MCA to make sure that we don't encounter those types of challenges. So Shaka, as the Deputy CEO, any thoughts that you'd like to add to what Chris has said related to the way that the MCA worked with external consultants to maintain its objectivity?
Yeah, like Chris was saying, I think despite all of those different, I would say, roadblocks in the way to make sure that everything is objective and transparent, we did have a few cases where people did try to, run the roadblock, so to speak. For example, on one of our major projects, which was a $18 million raw water pipeline, which we used FIDIC, Yellow Book, Design Build. We had procurement for the supervision consultant and also for the works consultant. Unfortunately, in both cases, there were not just bid protests, but some of the bidders went above and beyond in trying to organize a smear campaign against MCA to say that the procurement wasn't fair, or They tried to go to some of the ministers to try to sway them towards their position. And unfortunately, the people that they were trying to go to in the government are all part of the AFC, the Anti-Fraud and Corruption team that were trained by MCC at the beginning of this project. And they're in place to safeguard and make sure that none of these things happen. So despite that, there were a few people who tried to run the roadblock. But what we did between myself and the CEO and Jimmy, legal counsel, on a major project like that, we kind of knew ahead of time that something like this would probably happen. So we made a conscious decision that we brought in internationally procured experts for the technical evaluation panel, for the supervision consultant, procurement, evaluation, and also for the works. So these professionals have more than 30 years experience. They flew them in, sequestered them. They reviewed all of the proposals and the bids, and they made the recommendation. So none of us at MCA was on the evaluation. So that's, for us, I would probably say that was a smart thing to do, because then later on, when they started accusing us of, we said, hey, none of us were on the evaluation panel at all. The recommendation were made, sent to us, procurement agent reviewed it, and the procurement agent was in charge of the whole procurement process. It went to MCC for no objection, and that was it. So
great. So Shaka, again, thanks for providing that perspective of how you manage things at the MCA level. I want to take a step back because we're getting some really interesting questions from our attendees. So what I'd like to do first is address the issue of MCC to MCA and whether, the relationship between the two. How does a Millennium Challenge account relate to the Millennium Challenge Corporation? So Chris, could you address the relationship between those two,
Sure.
Authority and organizationally, please?
Sure. The MCA each MCA that's established in each partner country is established by the partner government. MCC, they're not MCC subsidiaries. MCC is not a parent. They're not a daughter organization or a subsidiary. They're an independent organization. Like MCC, each MCA has a board of directors. Actually, like MCC, I think in all of them, the majority of the members of the board of directors are government officials. It's normally an ex officio type situation, but there are private or non-governmental members of the boards. And in each country, MCC has an observer seat on the board of directors. So MCC has somebody at the board of directors meetings, but they don't have a vote. We do have oversight of the use of funds. We have no objection authority on a lot of documents and a lot of issues. So we do have oversight authority, but they are independent organizations. And there are public documents that are called compacts, or we have smaller programs called threshold programs. But each compact agreement, and frankly, there's a more detailed document called a program implementation agreement that describes how the MCA will operate. Those are public documents that are available both on the MCA website and on MCC's website. So everybody can see what the compact is, what the programs will be in a great amount of detail, and what the governance structure of the MCA is, what the roles and responsibilities of MCC versus MCA are. And often the bylaws of the MCA are normally published on the MCA website as well. So there's a lot of transparency around that.
Great, Chris. Yeah, thank you for that very detailed discussion on the relationship between the two organizations and how they work together. We're going to be moving into an opportunity to talk about lessons learned, and I'd like to tee up one of the questions that we have related to an early observation. So Chris, Shaka, Jimmy, when you get to your sessions, if you've got a comment on this, please work it into your remarks. So the comment was that has to do with the fact that the bilateral nature of the agreement, of the grant agreement between MCC and MCA allows the donor agency to specify how the funds get managed and dispersed. And we're looking for some comments on the lessons learned from the project and how they might be applied to loan projects that are administered by international lending agencies such as World Bank. And how might a loaning party overcome barriers that are presented by a donor recipient government that invoke national sovereignty? And how does an anti-corruption measure overcome that barrier?
You want me to answer that, Rich?
Doc, yeah, let's turn that one right
Okay.
to you, because I know you've got some observations on lessons learned as well. So please, your turn.
Yeah. So what I forgot to mention too is, both I think on the MCC side, they don't have a huge staff like maybe some other donor agencies. I know on the MCA staff, our staff was only about 35 persons, including 4 drivers, admin. So it wasn't a huge staff and directors. So one of the things that we had, one of the relationship issues is for every director in our agency, there was a counterpart in MCC. So they worked one-on-one with each other, whether it's energy, roads, M&E, environmental. Each director in our agency had a counterpart over there. I also had a counterpart who was the deputy resident country director in Monrovia. So each person had a counterpart. In terms of lessons learned and the difference between, I think, MCC and some of the other donor agencies, I've worked in the US over 30 years for consulting firms and with some of the other donor agencies on projects. The difference that I've seen here is the MCC really has the back of the MCAs. And when I say that, and I would say specifically that in some of the instances where there were, let's say, things were not moving fast enough in our projects, or there were roadblocks in terms of some of the implementing agencies, whether utility agencies, but there are people in the government that are not doing their part to ensure that we deliver these projects on time. The resident country director and staff, I mean, sometimes they would go as high up as the US ambassador in the country that would step up to the plate and, go into the president's office and say, these funds are intended for this purpose and some things are not moving. You've got to make, got to help and make things move. And so they really had our back, especially when it came time to some of these bid protests, which I mentioned earlier. They would step in because they knew that the whole process was transparent, and they really covered, other donor agencies sometimes would give a grant to a country and say, okay, here you go, and good luck, and maybe somebody's sitting in Washington or some other place in Europe, and maybe they'll fly into the country once in a while and see how the project's doing and, do a report, and that's about it. With MCC, they have their staff, even though it's small, they have a backup staff with folks like the Corps of Engineers. They have other consultants who they can send in to help us because we don't have a big staff. And a lot of maybe our staff is not as technical. Maybe this is the first time they've ever worked on some of these type of projects. So I would say the lessons learned, of course, the technical evaluation panels were very important. And I think it's helpful for contractors and consultants out there to know that you're bidding on an MCC, an MCA project, that you're not just going to be left out in the wild. If you have issues, you're not getting paid or you're being treated unfairly, that the MCA and the MCC, the US government, the US Embassy will ensure that the compact is successful. If at all possible, in terms of fraud and corruption, if there's any allegations of any fraud and corruption, those need to be brought to the attention and taken care of as soon as possible, because there's a time limit on these projects. So you can't stop a project to investigate a fraud and corruption and in the end find out people are just making up things just to put stick a cog in the wheel. For contractors and consultants, on sometimes on works contract, that sometimes the supervision consultants, not all, but they get out in the field and they become chummy, good friends with the contractors, and they just submit paperwork and everything is looking smooth on the paperwork, things are going fine. But then you go out there and you find out, hey, things are not really going smooth. Maybe they're approving things that should not be approved. So MCC makes sure that they have regular visits to the country. Technical experts, whether they're consultants, whether they're Corps of Engineers, will come in, and also with the MCAs to verify in the field what's going on. So some of the lessons learned, I would say, and I would bring up, is that maybe in our MCA, what we could have done, and in hindsight, which would have helped, is maybe have an industry day where we not only educate the government, we brought them in as part of the AFC team, and so they were well aware of the procedures, but we probably could have had an industry day where we brought in consultants and contractors and had a workshop and sat them down and explained, this is the procurement process, this is the bid process, this is the bid challenge process. Explain all of that so that maybe some companies wouldn't have wasted our time with some bid challenges when they knew that, maybe they just assume that, oh, it's business as usual, maybe these guys are not being fair. But I think they also need to be educated. And maybe that's something for, take away for Chris in the future, that to have those industry days. So defects in construction, they need to be addressed as soon as possible, so not delay the project. I think that's another lessons learned. There are no extensions with MCC. So the best lesson learned too is to make sure that you have a good team in place that know what they're doing. Because if you don't have a good team in place, MCC has no objection, and they object to the extension of anyone's contract, because our contracts were year to year to year, all of the staff there. So every year, or every 2 years, let's say, if someone wasn't performing, MCC would have an objection. And at that point, either the government now has to decide, you're going to keep that person and you, the government, are going to pay, not MCC, or you're going to make a change. And to make a change during a compact, it has it's a very tough effect, because it's months of interviewing, months of reviews to get no objection again from MCC, and then the projects are delayed. So I'll take a pause there. If you have any questions, Rich.
Yes, Shaka, I really appreciate the very detailed layout of a lot of the different lessons learned, and we were getting some really excellent questions. So what I'd like to do is I would like to take one of the questions that we've received, and it ties directly to what you talked about, Shaka, which was, and Chris, which was about the quality of the people who were brought in and hired within the MCA, within Millennium Challenge Account-Liberia, to basically administer the program on behalf of the Liberian government. So we've got a question that said that this individual's experience with the MCA in one of the countries in Central America ended up with some challenges because of a lack of qualified government officers. So the question to you, Chris, would be, how can MCC help develop the local capacity? And then before you answer that, then I'm going to tee up a question for Jimmy, which is related to the butterfly effect. And Jimmy, one of the participants, has asked the question of, do you see a butterfly effect within Liberia coming out of this 5-year compact, and how this AFC program that you had might help to strengthen integrity, anti-fraud, rule of law within Liberia or within the region? So Chris, if you could quickly take that capacity building question, and then Jimmy, we'd like to hear from you about the butterfly effect. Sure.
Well, as we say, challenge is our middle name, and building capacity locally is a big challenge. I have to say, I'm sorry about the experience in that Jorge had with the in Central America. To be honest, MCC we have some limited capabilities. The way that we're set up is we're a small agency. We have between 300 and 400 staff, and we currently have, I have it right here, $4 billion of programs operational, overseen by 300 staff. The compacts, as I mentioned, range from 60 to $700 million, and they have to be done in 5 years. And everything is run through the MCA. The MCA is responsible for everything. So to be honest, we don't have much flexibility for instance, for the MCA to hire a consulting firm to build capacity for local government officials to help address their capacity issues. That's a great challenge for us to do. The programs are budgeted and budgeted out in advance. Procurements take a long time, and again, it would have to be done by the MCA, not by MCC. So in a situation like that, what we generally would do is we'd work with the MCC staff, would work with the MCA staff and some of the contractors and consultants already in place, and try to address this specific issue. But we don't do much in capacity development. I used to work for a consulting firm that worked on USAID funded projects, and this is getting really into the weeds, but we also only allow MCAs to use what are called fixed price contracts, not time materials or cost plus fixed fee contracts. And so if you've ever worked on capacity building contracts, it's very difficult to assess what work needs to be done and price that out on either side, either the MCA figuring out how much should we budget for this, or the consulting firms responding to a request for proposals. If we have to assess the needs of the local government officials, design and deliver training programs, and then maybe do that in an iterative process. How do you put a solid figure on that? Is that going to be $1 million, $2 million, $3 million? It's easier on USAID funded projects where you can just bill as you go, and you sort of with a fixed price contract, it's a lot more complicated. And again, we're a small agency, and everything locally needs to be done by the MCA. So we would try to address that, but the way that we're set up and the way that we operate, it's really good and very, very effective on some things. And there are other things that we're just not really set up to do, as well as, for instance, USAID would be able to do that, I think, very easily. We're just really not set up to do that.
Great. Chris, thank you.
Richard,
Go ahead, Chuck.
Can I just mention something? I think with the MCA-Liberia, what we did is we organized our own sort of like in-house training, so that, for example, when I came in, having been an engineer for 35 years, I realized on some of these projects we're using FIDIC contracts, like FIDIC Yellow Book, FIDIC Red Book, etc. And so when I walked in and I realized that, except for myself, I think none of my staff probably knew how to spell FIDIC. I'm like, oh my God, they don't know what's about to happen here. We're doing a $18 million design build, a yellow book. And that's when I sat down with the CEO and I said, look, we got to send people to training. So we talked to MCC about training them in FIDIC. And they said, no, you're going to have to do that on your own. And we said, okay, fine. So we sent everyone in different groups for FIDIC training, either to Ghana, South Africa, and they all got trained. Procurement, finance, I wanted everybody to get trained because we didn't want anyone to hold up the process because they're trying to figure out, oh, should we pay you have a certain amount of time on a design build to reply to claims and also invoices from the contractor, or else you get more claims. So that's what we did. And so we just had to build it into our program. And of course, MCC approved it. And but that's my response on that, on the training part.
Great. Now, Shaka, thank you very much and Chris, thank you for that nice tag team answer related to capacity building and how you manage the training and education of your team. So being mindful of time, we've got approximately 15 minutes left in the official 60-minute session for the webinar. So Jimmy, I wanted to take a question over to you, and this is really now starting to look forward. What, again, not just lessons learned, but looking for the future. How do we build upon the successes of this compact? And again, the question from one of our participants is, what do you see as a butterfly effect, as a positive outcome from this compact with regard to anti-fraud, fighting corruption in Liberia, rule of law, and could it even spread to the region and really be kind of a beacon of strength as it relates to the fight against corruption in our built infrastructure?
Yeah, I'll say in terms of having like a general societal or overall governmental effect, I mean, I can't, I'm not in a position to assess that. However, I can say that dealing with certain members of the government post-compact that who were involved in the implementation of compact, they have mentioned to me that they liked the procedures and the protections that we had in place. Because the funny thing is, even though MCA-Liberia was a Liberian government entity, the Liberian government viewed us as being an American entity, and the U.S. government viewed us as being a Liberian government entity. So we're stuck in between, So like dealing with these certain government members, they liked the protection that they had in place. If somebody came to them for any untoward proposals, they could always say, well, this is compact funds, we can't do anything with it. So I think that kind of led that to have some on the individual level. I think is the butterfly effect that you referred to is more on an individual level than on a greater macro level. Another thing is in terms of going forward, because it's a huge priority from the Liberian government to get a second compact. And Chris noted that in order to get a compact, you have to pass at least half of the 20 indicators. But one of the indicators that you must pass is not an option, is fight against corruption. You can pass 19 out of the 20, but if one of those 19 isn't a fight against corruption, then you're not eligible to get a second compact. So being that this government has set as a priority to get a second compact, one would think that they're putting into place, especially our anti-fraud and corruption policies, or to highlight, to promote the fight against corruption, to ensure that they're eligible to get a second compact. So I think in terms of going forward, that is something that's a legacy of the first compact.
Great, Jimmy. Thank you for again teeing up really that importance of that anti-corruption factor in the success of Liberia working towards a second compact. So again, just looking at our time, we've got approximately 10 minutes left. What I'd like to do is to give each of you an opportunity to share some thoughts on, say, what are some of the takeaways that we can leave our participants with? We do have a couple other questions that are in the chat bar, and we will certainly get to those outside, once we kind of finish the formal session. And Fernando has a really important question about ISO certification that I want to address. But we'll kind of go around our virtual room here, and Chris, start with you, then Shaka, then Jimmy, and kind of your summary and takeaways. Then I'd like to thank some of the individuals from ACEC who really made this possible. For those of you that'll have to leave us, we'll say adieu at the top of the hour, and then we're going to continue the conversation for those of you that would like to stick around, because we're here to help be as transparent and open, and again, continue this conversation in a way that is as valuable to you as it can possibly be. So Chris, maybe lessons learned, thoughts, takeaways. Where do you see MCC going? What can we leave with our participants?
Thanks, Richard. Well, I think the good news for MCC is what we did in Liberia is what we do everywhere. It worked very well in Liberia, and we had great partners. But we have MCC has a formal anti-fraud and corruption policy. It's got a very long name, but we call it the anti-fraud and corruption policy. If you go on to mcc.gov and in the search bar type in fraud, the policy pops up. And so, and that involves providing training for our counterparts, telling making sure that the counterparts follow all our rules and regulations, and having them go through the detailed risk identification and assessment process that that Jimmy described. I think that's really important. I understand that it is kind of a standard operating procedure for a lot of international organizations when they go into a new country, that they go through a similar process, figure out what are the risks of fraud and corruption that we will face in this country, so they can make an assessment whether they want to do it. I think that I was in risk management before, and as I would always say, everybody does risk management every day. That's your job, is risk management. But going through a structured identification and assessment process is very important. And the other thing I would say is, for anybody who's funding any donor organizations or any owners that are building that are responsible for construction, I think it's very important to do a lot of site visits. It's very simple to create false documentation and make everything look great. And as Shaka said, that's why you have a supervisory engineer, because a lot of people assume that the contractors they're going to try to cut corners. It's in their nature, like the scorpion and the frog story. That's why you have the supervisory engineer. Supervisory engineers, they're local people. Sometimes the people who are, especially out on sites, they can get chummy with the contractor, like Shaka said. So you can't just outsource all responsibility to the supervisory engineer. You've got to take some responsibility and do site visits with qualified people who know what they're looking at. Not me, I'm not an engineer, but a real engineer to go out and look at things. I think that's critical.
Great, Chris, thank you very much. So Shaka, parting thoughts, words of wisdom to leave our participants with.
Well, I would say I would like to try to encourage firms, especially those in the U.S. And also overseas, to seriously look at MCC funded projects. I think once you have done one of the projects, whatever maybe hesitancy that you may have in working overseas, you can be assured that working with an MCC funded MCA, that you'll probably be pleased with the outcome, with the transparency and fairness. So I would encourage more firms to bid, because the ones that, in my experience, that lessons learned is we began to see the usual suspects. I mean, because they know this is a good thing. I mean, they know that it's quality cost-based selection, that, they're going to be judged on their qualifications, and it's going to be fair and transparent. For donor agencies, I would also encourage them to look at the MCC model to also provide more backup support, field visits, and also for future, if there are any future MCAs out there, or any persons who are working with MCC to develop an MCA, the key is to have the right team. I mean, it's in every profession, whether it's professional football, soccer, basketball, one person can't win the whole game. And even in our field, you got to have the right team, or else you're not going to spend the money that has been granted to your country. You're not going to provide the service to the citizens of that country for what it was intended to. And you're definitely not going to get a second compact if you don't do a good job on the first one. So MCC has to be happy with not just the results, but the team. So you have to get the right people.
Awesome. Shaka, thank you very much for that focus on the team. And Jimmy, your thoughts, again, as the former general counsel, what takeaways do you see that we can leave our participants with?
I want to focus on two things quickly. One, if for donor agencies to be similar to MCC, to have for it to be in whatever way time bound, because dealing with contractors and even with contracts, being that our contracting parties were aware that there was a time after which they won't be able to pay, it increased the chance of them performing in a timely manner. And when performing in a timely manner, there's less chance for disputes, but and go on and so forth, because they know there's a date after which the tap is turned off. So that's one thing, to perhaps put some sort of time constraints for availability of funds. But from an anti-fraud and corruption perspective, when it comes to these projects, I will say, instead of the anti-fraud and corruption being seen like some sort of incidental aspect of a project, for it to be seen as an essential, critical aspect of the success of a project. So just like you focus on the looking at the quality of the works, you should also look on the quality of the implementation of an anti-fraud and corruption plan, which goes to another thing is to develop an anti-fraud and corruption plan, have it updated and implemented forcefully. So I think those sort of things build a strong anti-fraud and corruption culture within organizations and lessens the chances of having opportunities to commit anti-fraud and corruption acts.
Great. Jimmy, thank you very much for those thoughts and focusing on the importance of a time constraint and then the focus on the quality of the anti-fraud and corruption plan. And as we're getting ready to draw again the official 60 minutes of this webinar to a close, I want to go back to what Shaka said, which was the importance of having the right team on the project or on the task. And I want to acknowledge the right team from ACEC and a few people who helped to really make this webinar possible and very, very successful, as well as the podcast that we hosted before it. So first, I'd like to thank Jerry Donahue, who is the senior communications writer from ACEC. He was really instrumental in helping to make sure that the conversation that Chris and Jimmy and Shaka and I had approximately a week ago was teed up, properly sound edited and mixed, and we got that out on ACEC's website as a precursor to this webinar. Maureen Brown is the Senior Manager of Education, and she is our Air Traffic Controller Extraordinaire for today's session. In the background, making sure everything went off without a hitch. So Maureen, thank you so much for everything that you did for us. Third, I want to thank Andrew Fort, who is the Director of Educational Programs for ACEC, making resources available, helping to make sure that we were all set up for success. And then certainly, last but not least, is Dan Hilton, who you heard from at the top of the hour, the Director of Procurement Advocacy and International Affairs at ACEC. Dan was very gracious to align ACEC USA with the Integrity Management Committee for FIDIC to start this series of conversations, to be the first penguin in 2022 as it relates to these important conversations within the AEC community, and to really set the bar very, very high for our friends from Canada and our friends from Mexico, who you'll be hearing from later in the year. So with that, for those of you that have to leave us, thank you so much for joining us today for an hour. And for those of you that are able to stick around for a little while longer, there are a couple of questions that I want to make sure that we address. We're going to do that right now. So let's go back to the question that we got from Fernando Favela over at CNEC. And Chris, I'm going to push this question to you. So he asked, does MCC foresee the use of international anti-corruption certifications like ISO 37001, which is the anti-bribery standard? Will that become a requirement for future procurement processes, whether it be for consultants or contractors, or maybe just kind of part and parcel the way that MCAs will be set up in the future? Can you speak to that, please?
Sure. To be honest, I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think it would be if I used to work for a contractor, if I were a contractor that had that certification, I would absolutely put that in my proposals, maybe even in my bid, in the bid cover letter. I would definitely reference that and brag about it. I don't know that we'll be going that far very quickly as far as requiring it, because while that would drive a lot of companies to seek the certification, which is a positive thing, it would also restrict the competition somewhat. So that is something that it is on our radar screen. We do know about this certification. I don't see it being a requirement anytime in the next few years, but I wouldn't rule it out beyond that. But in the next few years, I don't think so. I would just suggest that any company that's applying for MCC or MCA contracts, that if they have this certification, to certainly note that you have that certification, because it's definitely a positive.
Great, Chris, thank you. So we got a question from John Ritchie, and I'm going to ask each of you to answer this from your perspective and involvement in the MCC or the MCA. So John is asking that, or at least his observation is having the budget to hire outside expert evaluations committees to do the procurement evaluations is what appears to be one of the key ingredients for the success of MCA-Liberia. And looking at ILAs, international lending agencies, should they provide grant funds for the retention of experts as a condition of an infrastructure project loan? I know, Shaka, you've worked on some of these programs. Chris, you've got some involvement as well. And Jimmy, you can kind of provide a local opinion on that. So Jimmy, why don't you start in terms of your thoughts on John's observation, then I'll rotate to Shaka and back to Chris.
I mean, I think in the ideal world, yes, you would try to make some funding available for some independent evaluation in the procurement process. But the reality is not, whether those funds are available for that purpose. But I think yes, because in our case, it was very, like Shaka laid out, it was very beneficial from the perspective of time management, because as opposed to somebody in the team doing work on the TEP, you're focusing on your work on your projects. You're not doing evaluation, and the subsequent paperwork. You focus on the projects, and it's also the other benefit is that you're insulated from being accused of any sort of wrongdoing. So I think in an ideal world, if the funds were available, then yes. But I mean, in certain cases, perhaps if an organization has a certain amount of funds available and they want it for a specific purpose, perhaps they're not going to prioritize, although they should, but they maybe they don't have that sort of priority there in terms of that versus the project being delivered.
Great, Jimmy, thank you. Shaka, your thoughts both from your deputy CEO role as well as having been a consultant on ILA funded work.
Well, from putting my hat on as a consultant, I would prefer to have to go after projects where I know that there are technical evaluation panelists who are independent consultants, because I know it'll be more of a fair process than a local government, looking to put their buddies on the project. So yeah, as a consultant, I would prefer that. In the MCA, I think that I just had a thought in my head and it just disappeared. But the one thing I learned starting when we started working with MCC, and they continuously said this to us from the initial kickoff meetings, it was like going to sleep with this thing, this music just playing in your ear all the time. MCC has the saying that you will never run out of money, but you will run out of time. You'll never run out of money, but you'll run out of time. And they keep saying that, they kept saying that until at the end of the compact, I realized, oh hell, we still got money left that we haven't spent because it takes so long to get some of these projects off the ground, to get the TORs written, to get the TORs approved, to get the bids in. So I would answer that question by saying, the MCAs, yeah, you have the money. So invest the money up front in your TEPs, because even if you don't, I would suggest put out a TOR, get a pool of consultants like we did, and you have them already in the pool that you can pick and choose who you need when you need. You don't want to wait till 3 years into the compact and realize, oh, we need a TEP. That's too late, because then it takes 6 months to procure a pool of consultants, 6 months or 8 months if you're lucky. I mean, if you're unlucky. And so yeah, you have the money, do it at the beginning. You don't need to execute those contracts until you really need them.
Great, yeah, Shaka, that importance of prior planning is absolutely critical. Chris, your thoughts, again, from really the big picture donor agency perspective, how do you feel about John's observation?
Well, I can't speak for the U.S. government, but I will say that from the anti-fraud and corruption point of view, I often recommend that not only do they have independent panelists on the technical evaluation panel, but also that MCC or consultants working for MCC observe the panel, was easier when the panel would actually meet in a room as opposed to what it's been the last 2 years. But it would be useful. It's useful to know what's going on. MCC now requires, since Jimmy and Shaka don't know this because it's relatively new, but I believe we now require that all MCAs have at least one non-MCA, non-governmental member on every technical evaluation panel for every contract over $1 million. So I think that it's for every reason that Jimmy said and every reason that Shaka said, I think it's a good idea. And I recommend it myself when I'm doing anti-fraud and corruption training with MCAs, that they plan ahead and for any major procurement, particularly any major procurement, have at least one external person if you can, especially if it's big, like your big project or your two biggest project, international. I mean, even local, I should say the membership of the technical evaluation panels, those are confidential. People don't know who's on the technical evaluation panel. But if it's somebody on the MCA or somebody in the government, people know who's in the MCA. They know the relevant people in the government, so they can guess who those people are. But you bring in an international, and if you hire a local consultant, that's useful and very, very useful. But still, they live there and they're touchable in multiple ways, if in the worst case scenario. So an international person, even if pressure is put on the international person, as soon as they clear national airspace, they can get on the phone and report, I withdraw my support from the technical evaluation report because I was pressured, when they're no longer at risk. We haven't had that happen, but I always like to know that we have that in the background if there is, if there are independent people. And like Jimmy said, frankly, it protects the agency that's doing or the PIU, that's the program implementation unit that's doing the procurement, if it's not only their staff doing it. Because losing firms, a lot of times they are going to make accusations of potential fraud and corruption. Since 2009, MCC has had almost 300 accusations or allegations of fraud and corruption. 37% of them have involved procurement. So, and that's not surprising. As I always say in the training, there's the old quote about, why do you, against a bank robber, why do you rob banks? Well, that's where the money is. If a government official wants to get money out of kickbacks, or a contractor wants to take money out of a construction contract, they have to win it first. And a corrupt government official has to know that whoever wins it is going to be amenable to providing them with funds. So having an independent members on technical evaluation panels, I think is absolutely critical, and any donor organization and any organization doing a procurement should consider it. But as Shaka said, you need to plan ahead, because you don't have these people like you can't hire them immediately. It takes planning.
Right. And Chris, thanks for that detailed response and the thoughts on just how important it is to have those people isolated and the role of those expert team members. So let's pivot to another question we've got, and this is really teed up for you, Chris, as well. It's a question about MCC. So how does MCC justify the accuracy of provided reports and data in order to come up with its conclusions? And I think this is related to the indicators, the indices, say, that for another compact. And for the individual who asked this question, if I'm off base and off target, please let me know, and we'll recalibrate the question back to Chris. So Chris, a couple thoughts, please.
Okay, so I'm not on our selection and evaluation team. We do have a dedicated team in our Department of Policy and Evaluation that does this, that reviews all of the indicators, and they prepare reports that go to our board. Every country has something that's called a scorecard. Sorry. If you go on again, mcc.gov, you can find the scorecards for every country, I think since 2004. So it's all public information. But to answer the question, which I agree, I think that that's what the question is. How do we justify the accuracy of the provider reports data? Honestly, we don't, absent something that we know is absolutely wrong. It's independent. It's the description of all the selection indicators. I think the report, it's done every year. It's like 50 pages describing the methodology. We have very smart people working on that. And one of the things they look at is, are these indicators reliable, or are they as reliable an indicator as we can get? You know, is it as good as it gets? Which is sometimes in everything, but especially international development, sometimes that's what you have to go with, is the best of what's around. I know that there are, we do get complaints from multiple countries about where citizens will write and say, why are you offering money, a compact program to our country, because the government is very corrupt and they're going to steal all the money. So you shouldn't give the money to the country. We do get that. We do get those things. And the two things that I always say is to pass the control of corruption, and this is a little bit wonky, but the control of corruption indicator, it compares countries that are similar. Like the low income countries are compared to low income countries. The low middle income countries are compared to low middle income countries. When I started MCC, I was the country director for Moldova. And when I would go to Moldova, every trip, somebody would say, Moldova passed the control of corruption indicator? Really? Have you been here before? And I would say, at that point, Moldova was classified as a low income country. I said, well, you know, they're in the top 50% of the neighborhood. It's not a great neighborhood. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to insult any country by pointing out what countries are in that neighborhood, but it's not a great neighborhood. So them passing just means that they're in the top half of the low income countries compared to other low income countries. If it's a low middle income country, the top half of the low middle income countries. So Moldova, for instance, it was like 60%, I think, as a low income country. When it became a low middle income country, it dropped down to 25% because it moved into a better neighborhood. And also, we have so many controls that we talked about over the past hour and 14 minutes, so many controls over the use of the money that it's not like we write a check to the government of Liberia for $250 million and say, have fun, guys, tell us what you do with it. There's a lot of oversight we do. So there's corruption everywhere. There's corruption in the United States. As I always say when I do training, if anybody's driven the streets of Washington, D.C., you got to wonder, where's all of our road construction money going? So we watch how the money's used. So that's, and finally, we're a small agency. We have between 300 and 400 people, and we're running $4 billion. So we're not going to, it's just not in our mandate, and it's not feasible for us to be second guessing the indicators that are done, 20 indicators that are done on, over 100 countries. We just can't.
Chris, thank you for that, really detailed response related to how you look at things, and also the instructive example of Moldova and how they're really ranked against peers. That's a pretty unique toolbox for MCC. And as you've mentioned, if you go out to the MCC website, or if you go out to the MCA-Liberia website, everything's there. It's pretty transparent, and I highly recommend or encourage you to, for those of you who are really interested in the programs, to just see how the transparency works and the indicators and information that is out there, just as an example of how Shaka and Jimmy, as part of the leadership team in MCA-Liberia, pulled it off. I want to acknowledge that John Ritchie's asked a couple of questions about the World Bank related to would they, kind of do some of the things that we're talking about relative to, hiring external consultants or how they manage their cash flow. But I want to go to Mark's question now, which is something which is really important, not only to FIDIC, which is, quality-based selection, but it's also important to the ACEC engineering community because we have the Brooks Act in the United States. And Shaka and Jimmy, I'll pose this to the two of you, just kind of as leadership representatives for MCA-Liberia, and then Chris, ask you for your thoughts. So the question from Mark is, was the use of QBS, quality-based selection, for consultants and designers with the cost of services negotiated, was that considered rather than going to a QCBS, quality and cost-based selection approach, which was ultimately used by the MCA? So Shaka and Jimmy, kind of your thoughts on that, and then Chris will push it up to you to the MCC level.
I think we did use QBS on some procurements because if we, when you use like these blanket purchase agreement type, when you have like a pool of consultants, you would qualify them, and then I think they would take, just get the rates from everybody and come up with an average rate. So I mean, that's basically sort of QBS. But on the major jobs, no, it was all quality cost-based selection there on the major projects. And then the smaller projects, I think less than, I can't remember, Jimmy, is it $25,000 or $15,000? It's just basically based on cost. But those are mainly things for like for vendors, providing, I don't know, air conditioning or something. Can't remember, a desk or something like that. So I would say the QBS is probably, if you're looking at if you're looking like at a pool like the TEPs, I think. So the TEPs basically they would hire. I mean, you would be selected based on your qualifications, and then after the qualifications, then they negotiate your rates. So the TEPs were basically QBS.
Okay, great.
And all of the rates for the different consultants vary. So it's not one set of rates for everybody, depending on the number of years experience. So
Understood. Very good. Shaka, thanks for that observation and noting that QBS was used. Jimmy, your thoughts and observations?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much echo what Shaka just mentioned, that the QBS has had its utility on certain procurements, and on certain procurements, the QCBS was a better option, just to ensure that we have the best outcome in terms of having the best consultant selected. So I think, not to go into much details, but I pretty much echo what Shaka just mentioned, that in certain respects, the QCBS was just more appropriate versus QBS.
Great, Jimmy, thanks. So Chris, with regard to procurements through MCC, how does MCC look at QBS procurement versus QCBS procurement, say for consultancy services?
Well, I'm not on the procurement team. I will say that while Shaka said that MCC people, and they're right, you're much more likely to run out of time than you are to run out of money. It is a set amount of money. The compact, it has a set amount of money, and generally there's no money. It's had no additional money put in. MCC does review all of the MCA procurement plans. They plan out their procurement 6 months in advance, and part of the procurement plan is what is the type of procurement process that they're going to use. So MCC does review each procurement, and it will give a thumbs up as to whether, or a no objection, sorry, if it's QBS versus QCBS. From what I've seen, and again, I really only see stuff that's involved with where there are allegations of fraud and corruption, but in a lot of the QCBS procurements, it's normally a 70-30 or 80-20 weighting, cost versus, or technical versus cost. I worked for a USAID contractor for 7.5 years, and we saw that a lot. That seemed to be fairly standard. And I do think that if especially where there are concerns about quality, or somebody trying to underbid or lowball the contract, then the MCA will probably propose like at least an 80-20. I don't know if we've gone to 90-10. I don't think QBS is very common for the major procurements that MCAs do, because there is a budget, and we actually can run out of money, and generally we address the quality versus cost through the weighting of technical versus cost. Like I said, normally it would go to 80/20 if we're particularly concerned about firms lowballing. Yeah.
Right. Okay, Chris, thanks for the perspective from the Millennium Challenge Corporation. A couple other comments. I do want to hand out some kudos from Kevin George. He identified, really appreciated the panelists, and specifically Shaka and Jimmy. He wanted to commend you for your representation of Liberia. And again, having had this conversation now, this is the third time that we've had a panel discussion on the MCA program and what the two of you accomplished as part of your leadership team. I certainly echo Kevin's sentiment and really appreciate the time and effort that you put into helping to tell this really important story. So moving on to a couple other comments and observations. What is the future of MCC in Liberia? So I'll just kind of toss that one on the table because I know you've all touched around and nibbled on the edges of it. So who would like to take that one?
We'll lob that one to Chris.
I was afraid of that. I put in the chat function a link to Liberia's scorecard for fiscal year 2022. Liberia does not pass. They do pass control of corruption. They do pass, there's another thing, democratic rights, very important. They pass that, but they don't pass half of the scorecard. I have seen other countries where they will have sometimes in the Prime Minister's office, a team dedicated to push up the country's performance on these indicators. We actually call that the MCC effect because some countries have done that. They know what the indicators are and they focus on trying to improve their performance. I had to deal with, I discussed this with some Moldovans back when they became a low middle income country, no longer pass. To follow up on what we said earlier, this is one reason why MCC, in my opinion, I should say, I believe this is one reason why MCC uses these third-party indicators, so that the government of Liberia, the president of Liberia, can't call up our CEO and say, hey, we did well on our compact. Why don't you give us a second compact? We point to the scorecard. You pass or you don't pass. If you pass, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a compact. But if you don't pass, you're not going to get one. It's objective, whether it's 100% accurate, as the earlier question did. People have differing opinions about that, but I will say it's the best of what there is. And it's very clear what a country has to do. And when I worked in Moldova, even when they're a low-income country, they said, there was one indicator where they didn't pass on education. They said, well, we think that we passed it. And I said, well, don't talk to me. Go to your scorecard. You see, who created the indicator. Go and talk to that organization, because don't give me that information. We take it from the independent third party. So you need to talk to them. Don't try to lobby MCC. But so I would say, and I personally, hope that Liberia improves its performance on the scorecard so that it can qualify, and that MCC can recommend to its board that its board approves, that the board decides that Liberia will be eligible for a second compact. I know a lot of my friends that work at MCC also would like to work with Liberia again. But until the scorecard gets to passing, we can't.
Right, great. Chris, thanks not only for that answer, but also just for the fact that you've showed how there's so many multiple layers of insulation across just the entire spectrum of the life cycle of a compact. So even getting into the second potential compact, the country can't even figure out how to lobby or manipulate the system because the system is already designed with these external factors in place. So Jimmy, your thoughts either related to the future of MCC in Liberia or another topic. What can you share with us?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on this idea about the second compact. First, the point that Chris just mentioned, that from what I understand, with the first compact, Liberia did not pass the scorecard. Then the government did set up a team that was dedicated to, back in 2013, I believe, that was dedicated to improving the scorecard. And then Liberia passed passed the scorecard, and the MCC board recommended Liberia receive a compact. Currently now, in terms of a second compact now, in addition to passing the scorecard, from what I understand, MCC also assesses how you perform on the first compact and how you're sustaining those investments. Because MCC is not going to give you a second compact if you feel like if you just wasted the money for the first one. So not only should you have properly implemented the projects, but those projects that were properly implemented by the MCA, the government continues to sustain those. And even after the compact ends, MCC continues its monitoring evaluation for a period of 5 years after the compact ends, just to see how well you're sustaining their initial compact investment. So that's another layer beyond the scorecard in determining whether or not a country like Liberia gets a second compact.
Great. And Jimmy, that context is really helpful because you've shown that a country can maybe start off not performing as well as they would like to against the indicators, but with focus, and Chris pointed to this as well, they can get up over the bar. And perhaps that's kind of part of this MCC effect that Kevin George mentioned. And would like to kind of acknowledge the fact that Kevin is on the call. He is a representative from Millennium Challenge Corporation and was the former deputy resident country director in Liberia. So Kevin, we appreciate you being here and teeing up the questions, some of your questions, and acknowledging Shaka and Jimmy's role. That's really valuable, and we certainly thank you for taking the time to join us. I've got one last question here, if we can answer it, from Manish Kathari before we adjourn. And the fact that we've got enough conversational questions that take us another half hour is really fantastic. So this might be a question, I'll kind of throw it out to the panel. I'm not sure who can answer it, but would it be possible to share by percentage how much of the MCA Liberia compact funds went to different countries by nationalities of where the firms were based? Is that information publicly available somewhere?
Yeah, I can add that. Our procurements, everything is publicly available. So all the MCA Liberia website is still up and running, and on our procurement link, part of one of in accordance with MCC's policies, when everybody who wins a contract is supposed to be placed on the website. So not only do they have the name for the winner of any particular procurement, but it also has the value and where the country is from, and where the party is from. So that information is available on MCA Liberia's website.
Great, Jimmy, thank you. Chris or Shaka, anything else to add to Jimmy's comment?
No, I would say, we had, I don't know the exact percentages, but I'm sure MCC has all those different statistics. But we had participation from firms basically all over the world. Everywhere you can think of: Europe, Australia, Asia, the US, South America. We had some TEP consultants from South America also, specifically
Great.
from Peru, I think it was Peru, Panama. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so really this was a bilateral compact, but it had global participation.
I might as well say part of the deal with MCC funding is there's no preferential treatment given to American firms and no preferential treatment given to local firms. So Liberia is not allowed to say that only Liberian firms can apply for these particular contracts. Just like MCC can't say that only American funds can be awarded contracts by MCA-Liberia. It's open to all countries except for the usual suspects and countries that are considered non-market economies because of unfair competition.
Okay.
And I don't know that, honestly, I just don't know if MCC has it broken down by country, by MCA and by country where the contracts are awarded. I just don't know.
Okay, Chris, thank you. And Jimmy Chaka, thank you as well. We've cleared the chat bar and we've cleared all the comments and questions that we've had. And this has been a really fantastic 90-minute conversation and a great way to start just the 2022 Integrity of the Americas series. So Chris, Chaka, and Jimmy, and certainly Dan and Maureen, I know you're on and with us in the background. Thank you very, very much on behalf of the Integrity Management Committee. Thank you very, very much on behalf of FIDIC North America and certainly ACEC for all your insights, for your time and your thoughts. And Dan, if you've got any last words before we adjourn, I'll give you the floor. But
no, I think as we started, folks are wondering if this is going to be recorded. Yeah, we have recorded it. We're gonna try to get it up onto a easily viewable, hopefully a YouTube channel, so folks can view this, because I've got a few emails on whether it was recorded from folks who weren't able to attend.
excellent. And
Appreciate
there's
everyone.
a lot of good information here. If anyone has follow-on questions, by all means, please push them to ACEC, and we will get those questions answered for you, because this is the kind of conversation that just needs to continue and there's no reason for it to stop. So with that, everyone, thank you so much for your time. Have a great afternoon,
Thanks,
morning, or evening, wherever you're at, and look forward to seeing you on the next Integrity of the Americas session in June, or join us in April for a really important discussion related to the global fight against corruption, which won't be necessarily focused on the Americas, but will have a global feel to it. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Rich, Chris, Jimmy. Bye.
Bye, Jimmy. Bye, Shaka.
Maureen, thank you.